On April 9th, 1241, Batu Khan and his general Subotai destroyed a combined Polish-German army at Legnica, and nothing of any military significance stood between their cavalry and the Atlantic coast. They stopped anyway. But here's the question I haven't been able to shake. What happens to everything we call the modern world if they don't? 2 days after Legnica, they did it again. On April 11th, 1241, Batu Khan's forces destroyed the Hungarian royal army at the Battle of Mohi. King Bela IV barely escaped on horseback. Within months, Hungary was overrun. By winter, Mongol cavalry were raiding into Austria and pushing south into northern Italy. Batu Khan himself wintered on the Adriatic coast. Let that land for a second. The most feared military force in the world was camped on the shores of the Adriatic, looking west, and the kingdoms beyond them had nothing left to throw at them. And then, Ogedei Khan died. That's the hinge point. Ogedei, the son of Genghis, the sitting great Khan, died in December 1241. And under Mongol succession law, every senior commander in the field was required to return east for the Kurultai, the council that would choose the next Khan. Batu had no choice. The campaign stopped, not because Western Europe defended itself, but because of a political obligation 6,000 miles away. The Mongols didn't retreat in defeat. They left because their law required it. That distinction matters enormously for what comes next. Because here's what they were capable of when they came back to a place they'd left unfinished. Everything. Look at Baghdad in 1258, 17 years after Legnica. The Mongols sacked the city, ended the Abbasid Caliphate in a single campaign, and burned the House of Wisdom, one of the great repositories of human knowledge in the medieval world. Centuries of scholarship gone. The Caliph was executed. A civilization that had preserved and extended Greek, Persian, and Indian learning for 500 years was dismantled in a matter of weeks. That's not an exaggeration. That's the documented record of what a completed Mongol campaign looked like. And then there's Russia, the live case study, the one that actually happened. The Mongols didn't just raid Russia, they absorbed it. For roughly 2.5 centuries, Russian principalities operated under the authority of the Golden Horde. Historians are still arguing about the exact shape of that legacy, but the broad contours aren't seriously disputed. Russian political development froze. Institutions that were beginning to form, the early frameworks of representative governance, the slow accumulation of civic structures, stalled under a system that had no interest in cultivating them. Russia emerged from Mongol rule shaped differently than it entered, and some scholars argue the authoritarian patterns that persisted for centuries afterward were at least partly set during that period. 2.5 centuries. That's how long a partial absorption lasted. So ask yourself this: if that's what happened to the civilization that survived, what happens to the one that gets fully absorbed? Western Europe in 1241 wasn't some unified, battle-hardened fortress. The Pope had just excommunicated the Holy Roman Emperor. The two most powerful figures on the continent, the head of the Church and the head of the Empire, were not speaking. There was no coordinated military response, no standing army capable of meeting a second Mongol push, no alliance that could have formed fast enough to matter. The political architecture of Western Europe in that moment was fractured in exactly the way that made it most vulnerable. Batu Khan knew this. Subotai had spent years mapping European military capacity before the campaign began. They weren't guessing at weakness. They had assessed it. The only thing that pulled them east was a dead Khan and a succession law. That thread, that single political mechanism, is the only reason this conversation is happening in the language it's happening in, inside the civilization it's happening in. Pull it, and everything downstream rewrites itself. And the first things to go are the ones we tend to assume were inevitable. Russia survived a partial absorption and came out shaped for centuries by it. So if you had to guess, does Western Europe get reshaped the same way? or does it get erased entirely? Drop your answer in the comments below, because what actually disappears when a civilization gets fully absorbed is stranger than you'd expect. Now here's where the thread gets strange, because after Legnica, after Mohi, after Batu Khan's cavalry reached the Adriatic coast, the question isn't just what gets destroyed, it's what never gets built. Three structures held medieval Western Europe together, not militarily, but civilizationally. The Catholic Church as a political power, the Italian city-states as the engine of cultural and financial surplus, and the university system as the custodian of classical knowledge. A completed Mongol conquest doesn't just damage those three things. It pulls the foundation out from under each of them in a specific sequence, and the consequences compound. Start with the church. The Mongols didn't practice religious persecution. That's actually documented. They were remarkably pragmatic about faith, tolerating Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and shamanism within their empire simultaneously, treating religion as a tool of administration rather than a truth worth enforcing. That sounds almost enlightened until you trace what it actually means for Europe. The Catholic Church's political power in 1241 didn't rest on theology alone. It rested on the fact that it controlled land, commanded armies, and could excommunicate kings. Put a Khan in charge of that land, and none of that leverage survives. The Pope becomes a religious administrator, not a political force. And here's what that quietly erases: the specific tension between church authority and secular power. The grinding, centuries-long conflict that eventually produced the Reformation and then the Enlightenment never builds the same pressure. The Reformation wasn't just about theology, it was about who controlled Europe's institutions. Remove the church's political monopoly before that fight can happen, and the intellectual explosion that followed it has nowhere to ignite. Then there's Florence, Venice, Genoa. The Italian city-states were wealthy for one reason above all others. They sat at the western terminus of Mediterranean trade. That position funded everything: the banking houses, the patronage networks, the surplus capital that paid for Brunelleschi's dome and Michelangelo's ceiling, and the printing presses that followed. A Mongol Europe doesn't destroy that trade, it reroutes it. The Pax Mongolica, the period of relative stability across the Mongol Empire, actually accelerated overland commerce through Central Asia. Goods that once passed through Italian middlemen moved directly through Mongol-controlled corridors instead. The financial surplus that made the Renaissance possible doesn't disappear from the world. It just flows east. And without that surplus sitting in Florentine banks looking for something to fund, the Renaissance, as a specifically European phenomenon, simply doesn't happen where and when it did. Does it feel like a coincidence that every idea we call modern traces back to the exact window the Mongols left open? Here's the counterintuitive wrinkle, and it's the one I can't fully resolve. The Mongols were, by a significant margin, the greatest accelerators of cross-continental knowledge transfer in the medieval world. The Silk Road under Mongol protection moved technology, disease, and ideas faster than anything before it. Paper money, printing techniques, gunpowder applications, all of these moved west along Mongol trade routes. So a fully absorbed Europe isn't necessarily a static one. It might accelerate in directions we can't map because they never happened. And then there's the detail that I keep coming back to, the one that genuinely doesn't resolve cleanly. The Black Death, which killed roughly a third of Europe's population in the mid-14th century, spread along Mongol trade routes. That's not disputed. What is strange is what the plague accidentally triggered: labor shortages so severe that feudal landowners lost their grip on serfs, wages rose, and the slow dismantling of the feudal system began. Historians have argued that the catastrophe paradoxically accelerated the conditions for individual rights and labor mobility. In a fully conquered Europe, that vector changes. The plague arrives differently, spreads differently, or doesn't arrive at all in the same form. Whether that means a better outcome or a worse one, that's the question this script is not going to answer for you. Because the honest answer is that nobody can. The thread that Ogeday's death left intact in 1241 is the thread every institution you live inside was built on. Pull it, and what grows in its place isn't darkness, necessarily. It's just completely unrecognizable. And that, somehow, is the more unsettling thought. Subscribe if that thread is still pulling at you, and the video on what the Mongols actually did to Russia is right here.